MGTOW money. This is Canadian MGTOW. Having fun, and not giving a shit. Today's video is called, Are You Prepared for Economic Collapse? The 14-point checklist. The following statistics came from an article from the economiccollapseblog.com. The article suggests that most Americans are flat broke, and totally unprepared for the coming economic crisis. There's no reason to believe these statistics are much different for Canada. At the end of the day, what happens in the US typically affects Canada. I won't go into the reasons why the next collapse will be worse than the crisis back in 2008, but I am a firm believer that the next one will be much worse. So sit back, and see how many of the 14 points describe you. Some may or may not be applicable to you. Number 1. Do you have more in emergency savings than in credit card debt? 24% of all Americans responded no. Number 2. Do you have any emergency savings? 37% said no. Number 3. Would you say your finances are healthy enough that you are not living from paycheck to paycheck? In other words, could you handle missing your next paycheck? 62% responded no. Number 4. Do you have a positive savings rate? Adults in the US under the age of 35 have a savings rate of -2%. So they are either depleting any savings they have, or simply going further into debt. Number 5. If you have children, are you well off enough to not qualify for school lunch subsidies? More than 50% said no. Number 6. Have you avoided having unpaid debts to the point where one or more debts is in collections? 33% said no. Number 7. Can you actually afford the home you are living in right now? 52% said no. Number 8. Could you come up with $2,000 right now, without borrowing it? 40% of Americans said no. Number 9. Do you have 3 months emergency funds to cover expenses in case of sickness, job loss, or an economic downturn? 60% said no. Number 10. Do you have 6 months emergency funds to cover expenses? 75% responded no. Number 11. Is the grand total of the debt you are carrying much less than the average American household average of $203,163? Number 12. Do you own any gold or silver for investment purposes? Over 90% said no. Number 13. Do you have at least 3 days of non-perishable food and water in your home? 53% said no. Number 14. Do you have any emergency supplies in your home? 48% responded no. Emergency supplies consist of first aid kits, non-perishable food and water. How many of the questions were applicable to you? And of the applicable questions, how many did you answer yes? Number 7 did not apply to me, since I rent an apartment. Canadian real estate is way overpriced in my opinion. My final score was 11 out of 13, but luckily in my case, all I need to do is get 3 days worth of water and a first aid kit. I should stress that this checklist is just a starting point. I'm not saying we should all become preppers, and live in the backwoods, unless of course that is your thing. Some of the questions I would have added to this checklist would be keeping enough cash on hand in case the credit card or debit system goes down for days. In a severe economic collapse, some have suggested that non-collectible silver coins, particularly junk silver, might become the currency of choice. The last thing you want to do is walk around with a gold coin, asking if anyone can make change. Eventually someone would put a gun to your head, and ask where your other gold is. Some of the checklist points were more geared towards being able to survive a non-financial emergency such as a natural disaster. In Canada, the government basically tells us to be prepared, stating that emergency services might not be able to get to you for 72 hours. Personally, I find government figures are always off, so I would double it. Just look at what happened in New Orleans. Other things I would add to the checklist are a jerry can full of gas, an emergency generator, and an emergency kit for your vehicle, regardless of economic or natural disasters. Another good suggestion I found was to make photocopies of all your important papers and identification. Do some research on Google, and see what feels right for you. In light of my recent article about Venezuela, perhaps buy a box of condoms. You never know, you just might be able to sell it for $785 to some manginas. By being prepared, you might not only save your own life, but potentially save a lot of money, maybe even make money as those who are unprepared run around you, like chickens with their heads cut off. This concludes this article. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, rate and subscribe. Thank you. This is Canadian MGTOW, signing off. Save yourself. Go MGTOW.